Rachel Brooks shifted her weight from one foot to the other, watching the long line of travelers inch forward at Gateway Station's security checkpoint. The place smelled like recycled air and anxiety, with hundreds of beings from dozens of species all crammed together in the processing area. She was 16, dressed in faded jeans and an oversized hoodie that had seen better days. Her backpack hung from one shoulder, stuffed full but not uncomfortably heavy. To anyone watching, she looked like just another bored teenager heading home from some trip. The Vrelian guards running the checkpoint were hard to miss. They stood almost 8 feet tall, with bodies like giant praying mantises covered in dark green exoskeletons. Their heads swiveled on elongated necks, compound eyes taking in everything at once. Most travelers gave them a wide berth, and Rachel couldn't really blame them. The Vrelians had a reputation for being thorough, and not particularly gentle about it. Human. Inspection. The lead guard's voice came out as a series of clicks and chirps, translated into flat, mechanical English by the device attached to his throat. His claw gestured at Rachel, singling her out from the crowd. Rachel didn't argue or ask why. She'd learned that asking questions just made things take longer. She stepped forward and handed over her backpack without a word. Around her, other travelers kept their distance, not wanting to get caught up in whatever this was about. The guard's name tag read Kretch, in both Vrelian script and standard English. He took her bag and moved to a metal scanning table, his movements deliberate and controlled. Rachel noticed how the other guards positioned themselves nearby, hands resting on their plasma rifles. Standard intimidation tactics. She'd seen worse on half a dozen worlds. Kretch turned the backpack upside down and dumped everything onto the table with more force than necessary. A protein bar rolled off the edge and hit the floor. Nobody picked it up. Rachel watched as he pawed through her stuff. Energy bars and crinkled wrappers. A small music player with tangled earbuds. A couple of t-shirts and a pair of socks, nothing fancy. A beaten-up paperback novel with a cracked spine and dog-eared pages. Some toiletries in a clear plastic bag. Standard traveler gear, nothing that would raise any flags. She kept her face neutral, her breathing steady. The other guards were getting bored, she could tell. One had already started looking at his datapad, probably checking messages. Another was waving through a family of 4-armed Techrons without even glancing at their documents. Then Kretch's clawed hand reached the very bottom of the backpack and closed around something. Rachel saw his antenna twitch as he felt the fabric, felt how it was folded with precise, military corners. Not the sloppy way civilians cram clothes into bags, but the kind of fold that had been practiced 1,000 times until it became automatic. He pulled it out slowly. The fabric was dark blue, almost black, with silver threading that caught the harsh fluorescent lights of the checkpoint. As he lifted it higher, the fold began to come undone, revealing more of what it was. The checkpoint didn't go silent all at once. It was more like a wave, starting with the guards closest to Kretch and spreading outward. Conversations died mid-sentence. The clicking of claws on datapads stopped. Even the family of Techrons paused, their multiple eyes turning to see what had caused the sudden tension. Kretch's antennae were trembling now as he unfolded the uniform just enough to see the insignia on the chest. A silver starburst, perfectly detailed, surrounding a clenched human fist breaking through chains. The symbol seemed to glow against the dark fabric, impossible to miss, impossible to mistake for anything else. Terran Reclamation Corps. Rachel watched the color drain from Kretch's face, or whatever passed for color in a Vrelian's exoskeleton. His compound eyes went wide, and his translator made a sound like a gasp, a purely involuntary noise that the device wasn't designed to mask. The other guards had noticed now. The one with the datapad dropped it. It clattered on the floor, screen cracking, but nobody moved to pick it up. The guard who'd been waving people through stepped back from his post, his rifle suddenly gripped with both hands, though he didn't aim it at anyone. Rachel stood there quietly, hands in her hoodie pockets, waiting. She'd seen this reaction before. Everyone in the galaxy knew that symbol. Every military officer, every security guard, every pirate and slaver and would-be warlord had seen the footage, heard the stories, learned what it meant when humans sent the TRC. The plasma rifles in the checkpoint, the body armor the guards wore, the blast doors and security systems all around them, everything suddenly felt inadequate. Like bringing a pocket knife to an artillery fight. Kretch's hands shook as he held the uniform, and Rachel could smell the fear pheromones his species released when stressed. Sharp like ozone mixed with copper. "Dirty," Kretch whispered, and the word came out mangled through his translator. The device was picking up the panic in his voice, the way his vocal cords were vibrating at the wrong frequency. He'd never been this scared in his entire career, and he'd done security work for 15 years. The other guards stepped back like they'd been pushed. One of them, a younger Vrelian named Threk, dropped his handheld scanner. It hit the ground with a crack and the screen went dark, but he didn't even look down. His eyes were locked on Rachel, on that uniform in Kretch's shaking claws. Rachel stood there watching them with dark, patient eyes. She didn't look angry or threatening. She just looked tired, like someone who'd been traveling too long and wanted to get home. But there was something in those eyes that made Kretch's instincts scream. Something that said this small human teenager had seen things that would break most soldiers. "I'm on leave," Rachel said calmly, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Heading to see my dad on Mars. That going to be a problem?" It wasn't a threat. She didn't say it like a threat. But somehow it landed like one anyway. Because the unspoken part hung in the air between them. She was being polite, following the rules, trying to get home peacefully. But if this became a problem, well, they all knew what happened when the TRC considered something a problem. Kretch's hands trembled as he turned to the security terminal. He had to check. Had to confirm. Maybe it was stolen. Maybe she was just carrying it for someone else. Maybe this was all some terrible misunderstanding that wouldn't end with his career in ruins or worse. He entered her biometric data from the scan, his claws clicking against the keyboard too fast, making mistakes he had to correct. The other travelers in the checkpoint had backed away now, forming a wide circle around the scene. Word was spreading through the crowd in whispers and chirps and subsonic rumbles. Something was happening at Checkpoint 7. Something bad. The database returned results almost instantly, and Kretch felt his stomach drop as he read the information scrolling across his screen. Brooks, Rachel and species, human. Age, 16 standard years. Recruited, age 14, colony raid survivor. Unit, TRC 5th Special Operations Group. Deployments, 19. Current status, active duty, authorized leave. 19 deployments. In 2 years. That meant she'd been on a combat operation almost every other month since she was 14 years old. Since she was barely old enough to be considered an adult by human standards. But it was the next section that made Kretch's blood run cold. The list of operations scrolled down the screen, most of them classified with heavy redactions, but 3 names stood out in full text. Kepler Station Recovery. Titan Slaver Incident. Outpost 7 Extraction. Kepler Station. Kretch knew that name. Every security officer in 3 sectors knew that name. It had become a case study in military academies, a warning story told to new recruits. 6 months ago, raiders had hit a human frontier colony, a small settlement on Kepler Station that was barely 5 years old. They'd taken 200 colonists, men and women and children, vanished them into the black without a trace. Most species would have negotiated, paid ransoms, maybe launched a careful investigation. Humans sent the TRC. The operation went dark for 3 weeks. The human government refused to comment, refused to acknowledge that any of their special forces were even deployed. They broke 16 different territorial treaties, violated sovereign space of 4 different systems, and completely ignored the Galactic Council's demands for restraint. And then all 200 colonists came home. Every single one. Traumatized, some of them injured but alive. They were found on a transport ship heading straight for Earth, with a TRC escort that wouldn't answer any hails or questions. The raiders weren't found. Not exactly. Parts of their operation were discovered scattered across 4 systems, burned out stations and destroyed ships. The raiders themselves were never accounted for in any official capacity. The Galactic Council opened an investigation into possible war crimes, but it got quietly closed when humans released footage of what the raiders had been planning to do with those colonists. After that, nobody asked too many questions. And this girl, this 16-year-old standing in front of him in a hoodie and jeans, had been part of that. Had gone into whatever hell they'd found and helped bring those people home. The Titan slaver incident was worse. Kretch didn't know all the details, but he knew it involved a slavery ring that had been operating for decades, thought themselves untouchable because they had political connections and paid the right bribes. The TRC had dismantled the entire organization in 72 hours. Every slave freed, every facility destroyed, every slaver either dead or wishing they were. Outpost 7 was classified beyond his clearance level, but even the name made experienced soldiers nervous. Kretch looked up from the terminal at Rachel. She was still standing there patiently, hands in her pockets, looking like any teenager waiting for adults to finish being stupid so she could get on with her day. But now he saw her differently. Saw the way she stood balanced on her feet, ready to move in any direction. Saw how her eyes tracked every guard in the room without seeming to. Saw the old scars on her knuckles that he'd missed before. Your uniform, Corporal," Kretsch said, his voice cracking slightly. He carefully began refolding the dark blue fabric, trying to match the precise military corners she'd originally had. His claws weren't designed for this kind of fine work and they trembled. My apologies for the delay. This is entirely routine. We have to check everyone. It was a lie and they both knew it. But it was a lie that let them both walk away from this without incident, and right now that was all Kretsch wanted. Rachel reached out and took her backpack from Kretsch's trembling claws. He'd done his best to fold the uniform properly, and she appreciated the effort even if the corners weren't quite military standard. He'd placed it respectfully on top of her other belongings, like handling something sacred. She could see the fear in his compound eyes, the way they reflected the harsh checkpoint lights in 100 different fragments. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like respect. The smell hit her nose, sharp and metallic. Vrelians released pheromones when they were stressed, an evolutionary response they couldn't control. The whole checkpoint reeked of it now, like standing downwind from an electrical fire mixed with old pennies. Every guard in the area was broadcasting their panic into the air. Rachel started repacking her bag, taking her time, moving deliberately so nobody would mistake any quick movements for aggression. She tucked the protein bars back in, wound up the earbuds, placed her worn paperback on top. The uniform went back to the bottom, folded exactly the way it had been. Muscle memory guided her hands through the process. As she zipped the backpack closed, she looked up at Kretsch. Really looked at him. Past the fear, past the intimidating 8-foot frame and the predator eyes. She noticed the slight discoloration on his chest plate, the kind that came from wearing armor too long in combat conditions. The way he held himself, weight distributed evenly, always ready. The small metal pin to his uniform collar that marked extended service. You were at the outer rim defense, weren't you? Rachel asked quietly, her voice just loud enough for him to hear. 4th Battalion? Kretsch's antenna shot straight up, a Vrelian expression of pure surprise. For a second he just stared at her, his translator making confused clicking sounds as it tried to process his reaction. Yes, he finally managed. How did you? He stopped, not sure how to finish the question. Rachel shouldered her backpack, adjusting the straps. Recognized the metal. And the way you positioned your guards when things got tense. 4th Battalion's tactical formation, textbook execution. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had softened. Lost some of that hard edge it had carried before. You guys held the civilian zones when the Hive attacked Outer Rim Station. Held them for 3 days straight while the evacuation ran. Saved 12,000 people. The fear in Kretsch's eyes shifted into something else. Something complicated. He stood a little straighter, his antenna moving in a pattern that Rachel had learned meant pride mixed with painful memories. That took guts, Rachel continued. She meant it. She'd read the reports, seen the footage. The Hive didn't take prisoners, didn't negotiate, didn't stop. They just swarmed and consumed. The Vrelian 4th Battalion had been outnumbered 10-1, low on ammunition and supplies, but they'd held that line. Held it while civilians poured through to the evacuation ships. Held it while knowing that if they failed, thousands of families would die. Thank you. Seriously. Thank you for that. For a moment, something passed between them that transcended species, transcended the fear and the reputation and all the political complications. One soldier recognizing another. Understanding what it meant to stand in front of civilians and refuse to move, no matter what came at you. Understanding the weight of those decisions, the nightmares that came after, the faces you couldn't forget. Humans were terrifying, yes. The TRC especially. But they recognized courage when they saw it. They remembered who stood with the innocent, who protected those who couldn't protect themselves. They remembered their allies. Safe travels, Corporal, Kretsch said formally, his voice steady now. He brought his claw up in what Rachel recognized as a Vrelian military salute. It wasn't quite the same as a human salute, but the meaning was identical. Respect between warriors. Rachel nodded and returned the gesture with a proper human salute, crisp and precise despite the casual clothes. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the flow of travelers heading toward the departure gates. Kretsch watched her go, watched that small human teenager with the worn backpack vanish into the crowd. She looked nothing like the nightmares he'd been trained to fear, nothing like the horror stories told in military academies about what the TRC could do. She looked like someone's daughter heading home to visit family. But he'd seen her file. Knew what she'd done, what she was capable of. The disconnect was disturbing. His subordinate, Threk, moved closer. The younger guard had picked up his broken scanner and was nervously clicking his claws against it. Should we alert command? he hissed in their native language, not trusting the translator for this. Report that there's a TRC operator in transit? They'll want to know. Protocols say. No, Kretsch interrupted, still watching the spot where Rachel had disappeared. He thought about those 12,000 civilians, the families he'd helped save at Outer Rim. Thought about the human girl who'd just thanked him for doing his duty, who'd recognized his service when most people didn't even know that battle had happened. She's on leave. Heading home to see her father. Let her have her peace. But the protocols? I said no. Kretsch turned to face his subordinate, his antenna set in a pattern that meant the discussion was over. She's not a threat to this station. She's just trying to get home. We leave her alone. Threk wanted to argue, Kretsch could tell, but he didn't. He just nodded and went back to his post, probably already trying to figure out how to fix his broken scanner. Kretsch looked down at his claws, still trembling slightly. Then he returned to his duty station and logged the inspection as routine. Nothing unusual to report. Just another traveler passing through Gateway Station. It was better this way. Safer. Because giving humans a reason to pay attention to your station was never, ever a good idea. The security footage from Gateway Station's Checkpoint 7 started circulating through military networks before Kretsch's shift even ended. Not through official channels, never through official channels. That would require paperwork, incident reports, explanations that nobody wanted to give. But soldiers talk. They always have, always will. Someone had copied the file, sent it to a friend in another unit, and that friend sent it to someone else, and within hours it was everywhere. The video quality wasn't great, standard security camera resolution, but it was clear enough. Clear enough to see the teenage human girl in the hoodie. Clear enough to watch the Vrelian guard pull out that dark blue uniform. Clear enough to catch the moment when every guard in the checkpoint realized what they were looking at, the way they all stepped back like they'd been burned. In a Vrelian command center 3 systems away, Admiral Thex sat in his private office reviewing intelligence reports when his aide knocked and entered without waiting for permission. That alone told Thex something important was happening. Sir, you need to see this. The aide transferred a file to Thex's main display. Thex watched the footage twice, his mandibles clicking in an unconscious rhythm that his species made when processing disturbing information. The first time through, he focused on the uniform, that insignia that every military officer in the galaxy had learned to recognize. The second time he focused on the girl. How small she was. How calm. How completely unbothered by the armed guards surrounding her. How old? Thex asked. His aide pulled up the file they'd managed to access. 16, sir. 2 years of active service with the TRC's 5th Special Operations Group. Thex felt something cold settle in his stomach. 2 years. That meant she'd been recruited at 14. 14 years old, barely more than a child by any species standards, and they'd put her into special operations. Into the units that did the jobs regular military couldn't or wouldn't do. What's her background? Thex asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Colony raid survivor, sir. Her settlement was attacked when she was 13. Parents killed. She survived by hiding for 4 days before rescue arrived. The aide hesitated. The TRC recruited her a year later during recovery counseling. Humans recruited traumatized children and turned them into this. Thex tried to wrap his mind around it. In Vrelian culture, young ones were protected, kept away from violence until they were fully mature. The idea of putting a 14-year-old into combat was horrifying. But then again, Vrelian children weren't orphaned by raiders. Vrelian colonies weren't hit by slavers and pirates who saw civilians as merchandise. He pulled up the full intelligence file on the Terran Reclamation Corps, information that every senior officer had access to but most tried not to think about too hard. The TRC wasn't regular military. They weren't frontline soldiers or peacekeepers or even special forces in the traditional sense. They were something else entirely, something that made other species deeply uncomfortable. They were the units humanity sent when their people were taken, enslaved, or massacred. When colonies went dark. When distress calls stopped coming. When diplomatic solutions failed or were never even tried. The TRC went in dark, operated outside of normal command structures, ignored treaties and territorial boundaries and every rule of civilized warfare. They walked into hell and dragged their civilians back out. Every single time. The success rate was what made them legendary, what made them feared. 100% recovery rate on civilian extractions over the last 5 years. Not 100% survival, the reports were clear about that. Sometimes they recovered bodies instead of living people. But they always brought their people home. Always. Thex read through operation summaries, the ones that weren't classified beyond his clearance. The Kepler station recovery that had become famous. The Titan slaver incident that had collapsed an entire criminal organization overnight. A dozen other operations with bland bureaucratic names that concealed operations that had violated so many laws and treaties that the Galactic Council had simply stopped counting. And this 16-year-old girl had been part of 19 of them. He sat back in his chair, letting his compound eyes lose focus as he thought. There was a resource operation plan for Sector 7, a rich asteroid field that surveys had identified as containing rare minerals, valuable enough to be worth a small territorial dispute. The authorization had come through 2 weeks ago, just waiting for final approval to begin mining operations. Thex pulled up the sector map, zooming in on the area around the planned operation. 3 human settlements within 2 light years. Small colonies, maybe 5,000 people total across all 3. Frontier towns, far from Earth's core systems, lightly defended. In the old calculus before the TRC became what they were, that wouldn't have mattered. Start mining, humans complain, negotiate some compensation, everyone moves on. Standard procedure for territorial disputes. But that calculus had changed. Those 3 small settlements represented 15,000 potential hostages if things went wrong. 15,000 reasons for humanity to send operators like Rachel Brooks into his territory. And the TRC didn't negotiate. Didn't send lawyers or diplomats first. They sent soldiers. Cancel the raid authorization on Sector 7, Thex said quietly, closing the files. His aide's antenna shot up in surprise. Sir? But the resource deposits are worth. I know what they're worth. Thex cut him off, pulling up the cancellation forms. There are 3 human settlements in that sector. Small ones, barely defended. If our mining operation causes friction, if someone gets aggressive, if one trigger-happy commander decides to make an example. He trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. Find resources elsewhere, Thex continued, signing the cancellation order with his biometric signature. There are asteroids in Sector 9 with similar deposits and no inhabited systems within 5 light years. Mine those instead. His aide wanted to argue, Thex could tell from his posture, but the younger officer had enough sense to recognize when a decision was final. Yes, sir. I'll redirect the survey teams. After his aide left, Thex sat alone in his office, staring at the frozen frame of Rachel Brooks on his screen. A 16-year-old human girl in a hoodie, looking like she should be worrying about schoolwork and friends, not carrying a uniform that made experienced soldiers panic. Humanity had figured something out that other species hadn't. They'd learned how to turn trauma into purpose, how to channel grief into an unstoppable force. They'd created soldiers who couldn't be intimidated because they'd already lost everything. Who couldn't be deterred because bringing their people home was all they had left. It was terrifying. It was effective. And Thex wanted absolutely no part of finding out what happened when those soldiers came to his territory. Rachel saw her father the moment she stepped off the transport at Mars Colony Transit Hub. He was standing near the arrival gate, hands shoved in his pockets, scanning the crowd with that worried expression he always wore when she came home. The second their eyes met, his whole face changed, lit up in a way that made her chest tight. She dropped her backpack and ran. Didn't care that she was supposed to be a hardened soldier, didn't care about maintaining appearances. She just ran straight into his arms and let him hug her like she was still 12 years old. He smelled like soil and growing things, the Martian terraforming compound he worked at. Safe smells. Home smells. Hey kiddo, he said into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. You made it. Yeah, Dad. I made it. They stood there for a long moment just holding on. Around them, other travelers moved past, giving them space. Mars Colony was a frontier settlement, small enough that people understood what it meant when someone came home from wherever the war was happening this month. Her father pulled back, keeping his hands on her shoulders, looking her over like he was checking for injuries. You hungry? There's a new pizza place near the apartment. Real cheese, not the synthetic stuff. Rachel grinned. Real cheese? On Mars? That must cost a fortune. Special occasion. He grabbed her backpack before she could, slinging it over his shoulder. The uniform inside was just weight to him, just clothes. He didn't ask about it, never did. That was part of their unspoken agreement. When she was home, she wasn't Corporal Brooks. She was just Rachel. They got pizza that night, sitting in a tiny restaurant with mismatched chairs and pictures of Earth on the walls. Rachel complained about the recycled air on the transport, how it always made her sinuses hurt. Her father showed her pictures on his datapad of the new terraforming project his team was working on, a massive greenhouse complex that would grow actual trees. Real Earth trees on Mars. We're calling it the Green Zone, he explained, scrolling through design schematics. If this works, we can start introducing more complex plant life across the colony. Maybe in 10 years, you'll be able to walk outside without a breather mask. Rachel listened, asking questions, genuinely interested. This was what her father did, what he loved. Making dead planets livable. Creating places where families could build homes and feel safe. It was important work, even if it didn't involve weapons or tactical operations. The uniform stayed folded at the bottom of her backpack, shoved in the closet of her father's tiny apartment. Out of sight, out of mind. But across the sector the story was growing. The security footage had spread beyond military channels now, leaking into civilian networks, into news feeds and social media. And like all stories told and retold, it changed with each telling. Some versions claimed Rachel was 7 feet tall, built like a tank, covered in scars. Others said she'd been armed the whole time, that the guards had missed a concealed weapon. One particularly wild version claimed she'd taken down an entire checkpoint of guards single-handedly. The truth didn't matter. The story wasn't really about Rachel Brooks, 16-year-old girl from a destroyed colony. It was about what she represented. The message was simple, clear, impossible to misunderstand. Humanity protects its own. Always. No matter the cost. No matter how many treaties they have to break, how many borders they have to cross, how many enemies they have to go through. Touch human civilians and the TRC comes for you. In a station orbiting a dead moon, a slaver captain reviewed his planned route and saw the security footage. He recognized Gateway Station, recognized the implications. Changed course immediately, avoiding 3 human colonies he'd been planning to scout. The profit wasn't worth it anymore. Not worth the risk of Rachel Brooks or someone like her showing up in the middle of the night. A pirate crew arguing over their next target saw the video. One of them suggested hitting a human cargo transport, easy pickings, minimal security. The captain shut that idea down fast. Human cargo isn't worth the risk, she said flatly. Find something else. The crew grumbled but didn't argue. Everyone had heard the stories about what happened to pirates who grabbed humans. The TRC didn't arrest you or bring you to trial. They just made you gone. Admiral Thex's cancellation of the Sector 7 operation rippled through military planning channels. Other commanders saw it, understood the reasoning, started reviewing their own operations near human space. Expansion plans got quietly shelved. Resource surveys got redirected to less complicated territories. Nobody wanted to be the officer who accidentally started something with Earth. Rachel knew none of this. She was too busy being 17, being home, being normal. She ate dinner with her father every night, actual cooked meals instead of ration bars. They watched old movies from Earth, terrible action films from the 2020s that made them both laugh at the ridiculous stunts. She slept in a real bed with actual sheets, not a rack on a transport ship or a sleeping bag in some hostile environment. One night they watched a documentary about dog rescue organizations and Rachel cried. Just sat there on the couch with tears running down her face, watching people save abandoned dogs and find them new homes. Her father didn't say anything, just handed her tissues and kept his arm around her shoulders. She laughed at stupid jokes. Complained about the apartment's heating system. Helped her father organize his research notes. Argued with him about whether the greenhouse project needed better security systems. Read her beaten-up paperback novel cover to cover twice. Was a kid again for just a little while. The uniform waited in the closet. Patient. Always there. In 11 days, Rachel would pull it out, shake out the wrinkles, fold it properly and pack it in her bag. She'd hug her father goodbye at the transit hub, promise to message when she could, try not to see the fear in his eyes. She'd board a transport heading back to wherever the TRC needed her next. Because somewhere out there humans needed bringing home. Someone's daughter or son or parent was in trouble, taken by people who thought humans were easy targets. And Rachel Brooks, along with thousands of others wearing that same dark blue uniform, would go get them. She always finished the job. That's what the TRC did. That's what the uniform meant.